Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending. We appreciate the opportunity on behalf of the Legal Redress Committee of the Dayton Unit of the NAACP to present our program tonight. We have an all-star panel, as you can see, and I will introduce each of them in more detail as we ask them to make their initial remarks. But we're happy to have Reverend Rodney Cranford, Reverend Dr. David Fox, Attorney Ellis Jacobs, and Attorney Robert Gresham with us tonight. Thank all of you for being here. The charge to the Legal Redress Committee of this unit is to investigate and evaluate and explore solutions to issues that are brought to this unit, typically coming in through the unit office and distributed by President Forward to the investigators. Now, although the Legal Redress Committee is, on the face of it, charged with investigating, we do way better than that because we have two excellent investigators. One, the chair of the Labor and Industry Committee, that's Reverend Cranford, and the other, the chair of the Criminal Justice Committee. So it's a group effort like most things around here. And we appreciate their experience, backgrounds, and effort. Typically, the Legal Redress Committee, although it has that name, is involved, as you've heard from President Forward, in addressing other issues and supporting the President and other officers' activities as necessary and to give supportive advice. We'll start by going directly to Reverend Rodney Cranford, who, as I told you, is the chair of the Labor and Industry Committee. It's charged with seeking ways to improve the economic status of minority groups by, one, working to eliminate discriminatory employment practices, two, encouraging greater participation in the trade union movement, three, working to end discriminatory practices in labor unions, four, securing the enactment of state and federal fair employment practices, and finally, working to improve opportunities in vocational and apprenticeship training. Reverend Cranford is a native of Dayton. He went to Patterson Co-op. He has a degree from Miami Jacobs College and attended the seminary school in Dayton, Ohio. He founded the Life-Changing Ministries in 1996. He's responsible for the feeding program at the First Baptist Church. He's a Silver Life member of the NAACP, and he's worked on behalf of the Red Cross, Children of Incarcerated Parents in Springfield, Ohio, Thurgood Marshall High School, the Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and Feed the Children, in addition to many other organizations. He's the pastor of First Baptist Church of Ridgewood Heights and a longtime labor leader. So let me introduce Rodney Cranford, and he will explain what his committee does and what he does when he investigates.
Good evening, everyone. Once again, I am Rodney Cranford, and I am the chairperson of the Labor and Industry office here at the NAACP. First of all, just a little background. I was brought up in the labor unions, and I understood that if it had not been for the labor unions, if you will, that most of us wouldn't have the good pay that we have. We wouldn't have the insurances that we have. We wouldn't have some of the other benefits that industry would almost try to make you think that they're so gracious and love you so much that they just give it to you. You know, it was a fight. And everything that you're receiving now was because of some labor unions. And believe it or not, even some management are getting some of the best benefits because of labor unions, even though they can't be a part of, if you will, the labor unions. One of my biggest fights was when I became the union president at the American Federation of Government Employees back in 1985 at the Dayton VA Medical Center. I started out as a postal carrier and ended up as the union president within 1 year. But basically, what we do here in the labor and industry section of the NAACP is that we have a responsibility to represent anyone that comes into office. Race, creed, color, national origin, whatever may be going on with you. We have a if you will, any complaint that you may bring into the office. And what we do is you can call in, or you can go online and write in your complaint. Dr. Ford will forward it to our office, or you can come directly into the office on West 3rd Street. And what we'll do is do like an intake. We'll get your information, and then we'll kind of sort through your complaint that you may have. And what I ask most of them to do, first of all, is when I talk to them, be honest. Be for real about it. If you just got mad and you quit your job, you know, or if you were actually the person that caused all the problems, just be honest about it. And let's work through that issue. What I don't like to do, and I'll just keep it real with you, is call myself representing people, if you will, who are the ones that are the problems themselves. And if they have some problems, let us work through that. But if you're causing the problem, be honest with us so we know which direction we can go in. But you can bring your complaint to the office, you can file your complaint. We'll look into it. And as we look into it, of course, we're going to do our due diligence, if you will, to do some investigation, whether it be through a telephone call or whether it be through face-to-face talk with whomever you're having this problem with, and then we'll sit down and try to do a speedy resolution, if you will. If there isn't a speedy resolution of what we try to do in our offices, then sometimes we will direct you, if you will, to the proper place that has the most expertise. Even though we can handle most things that come into the office, there are some places that have more expertise, if you will, and been doing it for a long time, even though we have too. We can refer you to the EEOC, which is the Equal Opportunity Commission. We can send you to the OCRC, which is the Ohio Civil Rights Commission. And there are some other places that we can send you to. But what we like to do is do our investigation. And most times when they see NAACP or pick up their phone and they understand that it's NAACP, rarely do we get a shutout. A lot of times they do want to talk because most industries do not want their businesses, if you will, put in the limelight or a light shine on them about some things that are going on. We have a pretty good success rate, if you will, with people who come into our offices. We try not to go any longer than 90 days, but sometimes because of some processes that take with the EEOC or OCRC and some other places, their processes may have time limits to them where you can continue to go up the ladder, if you will, until we can get the result that we're looking for. Sometimes that takes a little while, but most of all, we'll just take care of whatever complaint that you bring to us. And it's not a hard deal. A lot of times we'll get people in that wants to complain about, let's say for instance, somebody's house not looking right. And they actually, want to complain about it, but in all actuality, there may be something where we have to send them to the housing authority. We can look into it, but more than likely that's the area where they will go. So, of course, I'm brand new in the office, but I'm not brand new at doing investigations and making sure that people's rights are being upheld and that you can have a quality life on your job. A lot of our complaints, if you will, come from a diversity of different places, but lately we've seen a lot of complaints coming out of, I guess I can say this, out of the Department of Veterans Affairs, some Dayton public schools, and actually some Christian schools that may not be treating our constituents fairly. And one thing that I found out when I visited up at the Dayton VA is that they've had somewhat of a change in their union, if you will, and a lot of people were coming down to the NAACP instead of going to your union office. One thing that the NAACP does in our office is that we will respect the union's right, if you will, as the exclusive representative of those employees that are there. So if you're under a union and you're under contract with them, then you have a contract that pretty much stipulates how you go about resolving your issues. Now, the NAACP can assist in that area, but the union has the exclusive right to represent you. Now, once all those things are exhausted, if you will, under your labor union, and you still feel as though receive what you thought, was fair, then of course we can still look into it, and if there's anything else we can do, we'll pursue it even further.
Thank you, Pastor Cranford. If you could pass that over to Reverend Fox, he's next. It's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Dr. David Fox. He's the chair of the Committee on Criminal Justice of the Dayton Unit. The charge to that committee is to seek to eliminate harsh and unfair sentencing practices, to advance effective law enforcement practices, to elevate the voices of crime victim survivors, to seek alternatives to incarceration, to investigate programs implemented by local law enforcement, and to eliminate zero-tolerance policies in our schools. We're very fortunate to have Reverend Dr. Fox with us tonight. He was chief of police at Wilberforce for 15 years. Before that, he was chief of police and director of corrections at Twin Valley Behavioral Center. He also served as regional equal employment administrator for the Ohio Department of Mental Health. He's been chief investigator for the Dayton Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's currently the chair of our committee here, and as you've already heard, he's a member of the very important Justice Jail Committee investigating the Montgomery County Jail, and that report again is released tomorrow to the County Commission. He earned his Doctor of Ministry in Social Action and Political Activism through United Theological Seminary, and he is a great, strong leader of this organization. Reverend Fox.
Good evening. Good evening. I only do the criminal justice stuff. I don't touch the employment, even though my expertise is in both. I was fortunate enough to start in the area of EEO way back in 1980, doing one of the first sexual harassment cases in Ohio. At that time, they didn't really know, they called it sex discrimination, they didn't really call it sexual harassment. But the state of Ohio was good to me. They trained me in a lot of areas. I helped develop the beginning policies in ADA, Family Medical Leave Act, sexual harassment training, those kinds of things. Then, of course, coming from the Dayton Police Department to the state of Ohio and to Wilberforce University, gave me a context of law enforcement and corrections in a lot of various contexts. What we do down at the NAACP as it relates to criminal justice is to deal with the whole system of criminal justice. From the police arresting you, to the prosecutors charging you, to being placed in jail, to being on parole or probation. And basically, we look at every one of those components when people have problems, because they have problems in all those various areas. Many of the problems that they have is because they just don't know. They don't have a clue about what their rights are and what their rights aren't. So my job with the expertise that I have in law enforcement is to be able to give them some information, not advice, because we're not attorneys. We do not give legal advice. We are not attorneys. I give information in regards to police experience, knowing practices, policies, procedures, having written policies and procedures for several police agencies. I know what the policies and procedures are about. So when somebody asks a question about whether or not the police can search me in these conditions, or whether or not I was arrested illegally, I can give some information towards that based on the information that I hear from them. I get all kinds of cases from individuals who are domestic violence to opioid issues in terms of people selling the drugs and people taking the drugs, all the way up to people murdering people. And my job is to just look at the criminal side. The tort side or the civil side, I don't touch that at all. I send them to these gentlemen here. That's their jobs. And so I just give them information as it relates to You know, most of the time, people are locked up in jail or they locked up in prison. And their family members come, mothers crying, or their girlfriends or somebody, they come and then we get together and we try to help them the best we can. I think probably one of the best cases that we worked on, myself and President Forward, to assist in this regard was in the relation, just I think 2 years ago, the young lady who had been locked up for 23 years, who had not actually committed the murder, but she was part of that. We worked with the agency out of Cincinnati to help her get released out of prison after 23 years. So it's those kinds of things that we can kind of affect some kind of change, and we also can occasionally affect public policy is what we try to do. And so at the end of the day, a lot of people come with problems. They need a solution. A lot of times we don't have the solution. But one thing that we can do in many instances is to help people in regards to my ability, and Brother Cranford also, sometimes we just got to pray. Because sometimes people are in some very bad situations. Like coming to me and saying, well, my son has been arrested. He is arrested on selling pills or selling heroin or selling fentanyl, and he's looking at 80 years. Now, there ain't nothing I can do about that except help them in regards to praying and telling them to get a good attorney. and that's the reality of this. And what that does do is help that parent be able to make that adjustment, because I just recently dealt with a situation where I was a professor also at the university for 16 years, and one of my students was incarcerated for selling heroin, and he was facing a lot of time in prison, and his parents had to come back and forth from out of town. And every time they would come in town, I would get with them, I would minister to them and talk with them and pray with them and help them get some hope as to the situation in which his son was facing, because they spent a lot of money. But at the same time, he got to do some time. And by him doing some time, they got to make that adjustment. So what we do is help in a lot of various areas. Sometimes we can help get them out, sometimes we can't. But at the end of the day, I'm like Brother Cranford. Don't come in there shucking and jiving with me, because I know your game already before you bring your game into me. And many people come in with game trying to claim that they didn't do anything, or trying to claim that they wasn't involved in this. But I can penetrate through all that, and once we get through all that, then I can help you. But other than that, you come in there lying to me, I can't help you. And that's what happens with most people. They come in, they don't tell you the truth, they give you half the statement, they only give you their side. So what we do is try to make sure that we try to stay neutral. We don't take the side, in most instances, dealing with the police. I don't take the side of the police. I don't take the side of the individual bringing the problem. I stay neutral. I do what is called fact finding. I go find the facts. I get the facts from the young person who comes to me. I get the facts from the police. I take that information. I then go get my sources. If you got witnesses, I interview those witnesses. I get data. I establish, say for instance, if it's a case dealing with police and it's a traffic stop, we go get the dispatch logs, we go get the radio logs, we go get all that information, and then we look at that, establish whether or not the person has a probable cause case. And if he does, or if she does, then we try to deal with it in a variety of ways. In many instances, the person needs an attorney. They have to have one. And as a matter of fact, all the instances actually. But in many instances, they better have an attorney. And I tell folks all the time, if you don't have a necktie, don't come talking to me. A necktie is an attorney. And they got to have one, because at the end of the day, they're facing some real serious situations. There's two things that you need to remember in this conversation that we have. There's two things. The first thing is, when somebody takes away your freedom, that's the worst thing that can happen to you. That's the worst thing. The second worst thing that happened to you is being face to face with somebody who has a gun and a badge. The worst thing that you can have coming at you is a person who has a gun and a badge, because they can be very, very problematic. A police officer, and I hate to say this, is the only person in America that can legally kill you. That's something to think about. Now, I've got these attorneys here, they say, no, that's not true, but they're the only ones that legally can do that. So that's what I have to have conversations with young people about, that when you're dealing with these police, better be careful, because they can do things to you. At the end of the day, you have a real major problem. And so we would invite you, you don't have to be a member of the NAACP to file a criminal charge with us. What we can do is take your complaint. You don't have to be a person being black, because we handle cases of people who are Caucasian or whites also. So at the end of the day, what we are there for is for justice. What is fairness, what is right, and that's what we're there for.
Thank you, Reverend Fox. You can see we have a wealth of experience and knowledge and ability within the internal resources at the NAACP, and thank you both for your comments. We're going to take questions for all of them once we get through everybody's initial remarks. The next person is Attorney Robert Gresham. I've been a fan of Robert for a long time, as he knows. He's a graduate of Purdue University and Capital University Law School. His practice includes malpractice, wrongful death, police brutality claims. He was one of the youngest ever elected members of the Board of Governors of the Ohio State Bar Association. He chairs the Advisory Council on Diversity Issues for the Ohio State Bar Association. Member of the Thurgood Marshall Law Society. He is a fellow commissioner on the Montgomery County Public Defender Commission, and he has served as commissioner on the Supreme Court of Ohio Board of Commissioners on grievances and disciplines. Robert is in the trenches. He's an external resource. He's one of the battery of attorneys in this community that do litigation, and his comments on the issues he handles are most appropriate. Robert works at Wright Schulte. Robert, welcome.
Good evening. You guys have me here as a substitute for Attorney Wright. I'm obviously not Michael Wright. You guys have seen the commercials, but I'll try to step in and fill his shoes if possible. Generally, what we do at Wright Schulte, like any other civil rights attorney, is we attempt to recover either compensation or some sort of systemic change with respect to police brutality cases, civil rights cases, and those can take place in the context of either traffic stops, shootings, or lately we've seen an uptick in the correctional facility problems, specifically in the area of brutality within the correctional system, the jails, and alternatively we've seen a lot of issues with respect to lack of medical resources or medical attention and care in the jail. So we're starting to see a lot more of that where folks are going into the jail and not receiving the proper medical care and treatment, and unfortunately they're passing away as a result of that. So we've seen a lot of that going on, and I'm sure the Reverend saw some of that in the discussion and investigation that they've been going through with respect to the report that's coming out tomorrow. What I will say is that what we try to do at Wright Schulte with respect to a lot of the cases that we take on, and you guys are very familiar with the number of the shooting cases, which unfortunately the NAACP was able to bring to us to help out with. Currently we've got the Dante Martin case, which is scheduled for trial on August 19th, I think. Hopefully we'll be able to survive the county sheriff's department's motion to get rid of the case, which we expect any day now. Once we are able to survive that, we're excited to potentially take that to trial and advocate for Dante's family. I'm sure there's folks in the room who knows that family, and this case has been going on for some time. The John Crawford case still going on. It's currently on appeal. There were a number of decisions with respect to some of the motions filed by the city of Beaver Creek, Walmart, as well as on behalf of the shooting officer. So that case is still going on, unfortunately, but and we're still putting up a good fight there. But one of the things we've tried to focus in on with respect to these cases is beyond just the financial compensation side of it, and that's primarily what we are able to do within the civil context. We're starting to attach reform to those particular settlements or those results. In the Sam DuBose case down in Cincinnati, we were able to attach actual reform with respect to the University of Cincinnati Police Department, and it called for diversity training, implicit bias training, things that would change the system with respect to how police interact with the community. Now, I have my own personal opinions with regard to whether or not that relationship is actually salvageable, and we can talk about that now. You can certainly allow for questions on that particular issue, but in the context of where we are now, we try to do our best to represent these families and advocate for these families, and in addition to the compensation which we can secure for the families, which we all know can't bring their loved ones back. So that's one of the first things we talk about, but we try to see if we can reform those police departments, because unfortunately, these massive settlements aren't being effective in keeping police from shooting people of color in our communities. You would think that all the money that these cities are paying out would have some sort of role or some sort of influence, but unfortunately, and candidly, this goes to some of your city government officials, they continue to pay this money out without any sort of reform with respect to their police departments. So keep in mind that your mayors and your city managers and your commissioners, they control your chiefs of police. So they have a very direct role in how your police interact with your community. So if things aren't changing, there's certain places you can look. But I don't want to talk too long. I want to allow for questions at some point tonight. But certainly any question you have with respect to the police issue, nothing is off limits as far as I'm concerned. On some issue, I'll let you know when I'm speaking for Robert Gresham, and I'll also let you know when I'm speaking for Wright Schulte. But certainly, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I have a 5-month-old at home, so now it's even more important to me because I look at the world that my son's grown up in, and as a young black male, the interaction with law enforcement is and has always been a tricky and very scary interaction. So whatever questions you have, I'm definitely willing to answer those.
Thank you, Robert. I can tell you Robert Gresham and Michael Wright are two of the most dedicated attorneys in our legal community. They're both members of the Miami Valley Trial Lawyers Association, which is a group of us who tend to represent plaintiffs in various matters. And Robert and Michael in particular are great on those types of police brutality and related claims, so thank you for being here. The next person I'll introduce is a good friend for a long time. That's Ellis Jacobs, an attorney. He went to Fairview High School, OU, and the University of Dayton School of Law. He is the senior attorney at Advocates for Basic Legal Equality. We call it ABLE. It's a nonprofit regional law firm that provides legal assistance in civil matters to help eligible low-income individuals and groups in Western Ohio achieve self-reliance, equal justice, and economic opportunity. It is an entity, not the traditional law firm. It handles civil cases, that is, non-criminal cases, legal matters that promote systemic change on behalf of individuals and groups. Sometimes the type of cases that law firms are not equipped to handle, and the kind of work that Ellis Jacobs and ABLE have done in our community is well known. He's led the Voter Protection Coalition. He's helped organize unions at several Dayton workplaces. He's fought utility rate increases and fought a nuclear power initiative. ABLE and Ellis Jacobs have worked to establish and facilitate the Gem City market. They've been a big player in that effort. To address the closing of Premier's Good Samaritan Hospital, they've been very involved in that effort. They work to reverse developer policies related to RTA access at Fairville Common Mall, and many other under-the-radar efforts. So it's a privilege to have Ellis Jacobs here. He is the rock of that entity, and Ellis, we appreciate your remarks.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, really. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with such a distinguished group of other advocates. I know Robert's work and the work of his firm, they take really hard cases and do a terrific job with it. And I know of the work of the NAACP investigating employment and police misconduct problems, and you also do a marvelous job at that. We fit a slightly different niche in the legal community. If you think about the legal world, it's maybe divided into two different types of law firms. One type of law firm, the person hiring them either pays them or they take the case based on a contingency, and then the bad guy ultimately ends up paying at the end of the case, or at least that's the way everybody hopes it works out. The other model is the model that I work for. It's a nonprofit public interest law firm. So our clients don't pay us. We get paid because we have fundraisers that go out and shake trees and raise money for us, and because many years ago, during the War on Poverty, the federal government set up the Legal Service Corporation that provides some federal funds to provide funds for organizations like ours. And so that's how we get paid, and that's how we work, and we do fit a slightly different niche than what the other lawyers in town do. I've been lucky enough to work on a number of cases that I can get really excited about. And in fact, I think all the lawyers in the office, we have about a dozen lawyers in the Dayton office, we're all working on stuff that we think are really important, really significant work for the community. Like Gary mentioned, we represent the Gem City Market. We do their legal work. That's the effort to create a worker and community-owned food co-op in a food desert here in Dayton. I do voting rights work. I've represented people in Jefferson Township when the Army was going to try to bring partially treated VX nerve agent to a facility there that would barely handle industrial materials and process it at the risk of everybody's health in the community. I represented people who wanted to get buses to go to the Beaver Creek Mall. You may remember that just outrageous thing where Beaver Creek said, no, those people will bring crime to our pristine community. We don't want the bus coming here. And it was a major fight that went on for years in order to be able to have a bus stop in Beaver Creek. That kind of stuff still goes on, but I don't need to tell you that. It's shocking when it does. And so we're honored to be able to be available to represent people in those sorts of situations. Presently, along with Michael Wright and a bunch of other lawyers, I'm representing the people that are concerned about the closing of Good Samaritan Hospital, a big struggle for this community that's going to leave this neighborhood, that neighborhood, a healthcare desert to go along with the fact that it's already a food desert. I'm involved in representing the class of inmates at the Montgomery County Jail, trying to solve the problems there, the exact same problems that Reverend Fox is involved in trying to solve through the committee that he's been involved in. And I know tomorrow morning at 9:30, when they release that report at the County Commission meeting, it's an open meeting, I'm going to be there because I really want to see what that report says. I have a feeling it's going to make a big stride for this community in being able to finally solve the problems that have been going on in that jail for a very long time. So that's the kind of work I've been able to do. Our office does all kinds of other stuff that you might be able to take advantage of, or people you know can take advantage of. We represent people in all kinds of domestic relations cases. Generally, only those cases where there's some element of domestic violence involved. And the reason we limit it like that is because there are so many domestic relations cases in the world, we just don't have enough cases to do it, take them all. So we just take the most serious ones. And so if you know circumstances like that, we can represent people that need our help. We represent people in housing situations. We do a lot of eviction defense work, where people are being evicted, they need to work out a deal, or maybe they're being wrongly evicted, or maybe they're being discriminated against in housing. We take those kind of cases. Please send people to us if you know about people with those sorts of problems. We take education cases. This is something that I think we've all begun to recognize as a critical area for activity. If people are being discriminated against, if they're being put into the school-to-prison pipeline, then the education system is not serving the function it's supposed to serve. And so we represent students, we represent parents who feel that the education system isn't serving them and who have needs that we might be able to help them. So if you're aware of situations like that, people who need IEP, people who are being unfairly disciplined, we want to be involved in those circumstances. People who aren't getting the kind of public benefits they're entitled to, we can help. People with consumer matters that are being shafted in one way or another, we can help. These are all the kind of cases that we I brought some brochures. This may not surprise you. Please pick some of these up. I brought a bunch of extras, so if you know somewhere where you could take 10 of these, take them with you. If you want to know more about how we're funded and all that kind of stuff, I did bring some of our annual reports. It's more than most people want to know, but you're more than welcome to one of these. So how do you access our services? On the brochure, you'll see that you can call us up, or we've got a website. Contact us, perhaps a paralegal talk to you on the phone. They'll determine whether you've got the kind of case that we can handle. If it is, we'll invite you down for employment. You'll see a lawyer. Our lawyers are real lawyers. Sometimes we get that, they're real lawyers. Yeah, they're real lawyers. They're wonderful lawyers. They do a great job. We have Spanish-speaking lawyers at our office. Maybe some of the few law offices in town with Spanish-speaking lawyers. So if you know people that need to communicate in Spanish, we can help them. Please don't hesitate to call us. We want to play our role in seeking justice for all communities in the Dayton area, and we look forward to helping.
Thank you, Ellis. If you have questions, you're welcome to line up there. We'll get a microphone over to you. But before we take the first question there, I'd like to ask our investigators, how do you guys have time for the number of complaints you handle, and how do you manage that workload?
Well, in our office, we currently have one investigator besides myself. We are down one investigator, but a lot of our time is volunteered. Every bit of it, actually 100% of it is volunteered. And we do take the time because we care about our community, we care about our constituents. I think it's been said before, we have some people that come in with tears in their eyes and they're down to their last penny and they need some help. And so because of the expertise that we have, we're able to do our best to help them out, and a lot of times we can get them relief. And so a lot of our time is pretty much all volunteer, and we take that time, to help those that need help.
We are open from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day. And if anyone has a complaint, all they have to do is come down between those hours. And I don't know about Reverend Cranford, but nobody's paid. It's all volunteer. We just do it because we love the community. And I'm telling you, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to give the mic back to Brother Leppla. Let me explain something to you. I've worked in law enforcement for 40 years. I was in education for 42 years. You're probably saying, well, how is that possible? But anyway, I was doing both of them at the same time most of the time. But let me explain something to you. I work for a lot of folk. But the hardest job I've ever had is working down in the NAACP. I don't get paid. Everything I do is volunteer. But them people come down there and order you around, don't give you a dime, don't even buy a membership. But they want the world done for them. They come down there upset at their attorneys, they're mad at their attorneys, the attorney haven't done this, they haven't done that. Then they come down here and jump all on me. At the end of the day, we're down there as public servants to help those who don't have or cannot afford a good attorney or just don't have the means to help themselves. So we do the best we can do to help them. But please, if you know somebody coming out there, please tell them don't come down there and beat me up like that.
While we take the mic over for questions, I'm going to pose a question to Attorney Gresham here. How do you deal with the time delays you get? Obviously, you picked an example of a case that was gone a long time. How do you cope with delays, and what can you do to make cases move faster?
Well, often with a lot of these cases, especially when you're in federal court, a lot of that stuff isn't really something you have control over. You typically will try to make sure you facilitate the relationship with the judge. In this particular district, everybody knows Judge Rice. We would try to make sure that we have those relationships relationships, and a lot of times there's a lot of conversations going on behind closed doors with respect to dealing with the other attorneys. But generally what you can do as a practicing attorney, you know this, Gary, that you can, we'll typically push the discovery process. And what that means is we're taking depositions of the necessary parties within a case. So, for example, within the John Crawford case, and let me just draw a real small caveat, I'm not actually working on the case, and I have to say that publicly because the law firm I left is now the law firm that represents the Beaver Creek Police Department. So before I left, they kind of rolled me off from that particular case, probably strategically, but we still have a bunch of good folks on that case. So what I do know is basically public knowledge, but what I will say is strategically, as an attorney, you typically try to force the discovery process and take the pertinent depositions. For example, in the Dante Martin case, we've taken a lot of depositions of a number of the Sheriff's Department officials. We've taken the deposition of the sheriff, or the former sheriff in particular, and those depositions can be very uncomfortable for those folks because they don't typically want to answer some of the questions that we're going to ask. So the idea behind that is you try and facilitate and push the case forward, but unfortunately, we still are at the whim of the federal court and the discovery process. And in federal court, those cases can take a little while. In state court, we've got a little bit more control over how fast we get those cases to either trial or resolution, simply because of the nature of the direct contact with the judges and the law that you're dealing with. In federal court, there's a lot of mechanisms in place that, unfortunately, defense attorneys can attempt to kind of hide behind, and you have different mechanisms that these different municipalities will utilize to try and get rid of cases. Without getting too much into the technical aspect of it, in federal court and in this country, a lot of these cities and these police departments have a mechanism called a motion for summary judgment. And basically what that means is the law allows them to file a motion in which they typically will file a motion and argue that from a particular police officer's perspective, were his actions appropriate? What that means is not from a reasonable officer necessarily, but from that particular officer. And the law is actually written, from my perspective, incorrectly. We're trying to see if we can find ways legally to kind of change that particular standard. But the problem is that right now the default in this country is that force is considered the standard, and the use of excessive force is an exception. And you have to basically prove why an officer shouldn't have used force rather than the alternative. From my perspective, the law should probably be changed to say that force is never the standard, and officers should have to prove why they were allowed to use force. And that's a little bit different standard because it puts the onus on the police department to say, you can't use force every single time something happens, and if you do use it, now you have to prove why it was necessary in that particular circumstance. But took a little bit of a caveat there, but it can be, you have to understand the law, and you have to be really aggressive about putting the feet to the fire of the police departments or the sheriff's departments or the city, depending on who you're suing in whatever particular case.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Just real quick, I guess people come up and ask questions, just make certain that when you ask your question, you state your name and then your question. But before the gentleman comes up, I just want to take this opportunity to thank, because a lot of times NAACP is a thankless job. Okay, it's a painless job and it's a thankless job. And as you heard Reverend Fox state, we don't get paid to do the job that we do. The Lord has blessed each one of us with certain knowledge, skills, and abilities to help people. And that's what we have been charged to do inside of American society at this moment in history. So with that said, I appreciate the fact that the people who do get paid, such as Ellis Jacobs and Gresham, that they did at least acknowledge the fact that we do send them cases. It has been high-profile cases, so even though we don't get paid, but we still send people. Once we do our little investigation or our investigation, then we'll work along with the attorney. So once somebody gets an attorney, once somebody retains an attorney, then the NAACP kind of pulls out and it'll work alongside with the attorneys, not to impede upon the attorneys, the direction they're taking a particular case. So just so you know that, it's like the John Crawford case, the Dante Martin case, the Beaver Creek school bus case. We were involved in that. All you had to do is rewind the tape. What's the one guy's TV all the time. I can't think of his name at the present time, but all you gotta do is just rewind the tape. Al Sharpton is the name I'm thinking of. That's what he said, rewind the tape when it came to the John Crawford case. So all you gotta do is look back through, and you'll see the NAACP is on the front side of all these major cases that happen inside this community. But once they retain an attorney, then we pull back. And just so that you'll know that, and just so you can tell your friends that, or your family members, anybody who come to our office, if you retain an attorney, the NAACP is going to pull back and follow the advice of those attorneys. So I just want to make that clear. And I do want to acknowledge, as my former legal redress chairperson here, who worked and got a settlement, on a Motel 6 case, and that is now Judge Amir Worthing Spells. Can you stand and be recognized? So my first 10 years as president of this organization, she served as my legal redress chair, and and won big victories on behalf of the American people inside the Dayton, Ohio community. So now we have Attorney Gary Leppla doing the same thing, passing the mantle. Now he's doing the same thing. So I try to make sure that everybody understands the way we work and how we go to market. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Williams. I'm from here in Dayton, Ohio. And I just have a question for pretty much everybody. And the gentleman that spoke earlier about suspension for students. My question is, why have we softened our stance on consequences, even though we stepped up our fight? There's no consequences for the actions of shooting of cops. shooting by cops of unarmed blacks or just blacks period. What the gentleman said about suspending the students, I do agree that students shouldn't be just so willy-nilly suspended from school. However, can we stop eliminating people's consequences for their actions and stop just implementing a diversion training or diversity training and implement that along with the consequences? Because what seems to be going on is nobody cares about facing a trial for shooting an unarmed black man or shooting a black man just, and killing him unjustly. Nobody cares about it because no consequences are being faced. We're focusing on civil suits and money and not getting paid or getting paid when the focus should be on consequences. People suffering a consequence. We have for years in the United States of America, and racial issues are one of the biggest and longest standing issues, and now that we have those issues that are putting them on the forefront, for some reason we're backing off of consequences. So I just want to know how that helps to back up off of consequences and implement diversity training programs, which everybody has said may or may not work. You can't deprogram somebody with an 8-hour class, but you can give them a consequence. And the consequences they know that they'll face if they do so. And that's all.
Thank you. Robert?
Well, I would say I agree with just about everything you said. The problem is not that there's not consequences. The reality is the system is set up not to, at least within the context of police officers, is set up not to hold them accountable. Let me give you a couple examples. When it comes to the criminal result with respect to an officer shooting somebody, you're relying on a prosecutor who has a working relationship with the police department to bring those charges against an officer. And what will happen is, and this takes some understanding of the criminal justice process, whenever a crime is indicted, they bring a grand jury. And a grand jury basically hears all the evidence from a prosecutor that they choose to present in order to bring an indictment against an individual for a particular crime. Now, if it were you or I, assuming you're not a police officer, generally what the prosecutor will do is they will pick and choose the evidence that they present, and they will only choose the evidence which proves you guilty of a particular crime. They typically won't present the evidence that would exonerate you. That's a strategic decision that a prosecutor makes, okay? Now, in the context of a police officer, it's actually a very interesting dynamic because that's the only scenario in which I've seen prosecutors produce every single piece of evidence they have, whether it's indictable or whether it exonerates that officer. And by and large, and disproportionately, what you'll see is prosecutors presenting evidence to a grand jury that exonerate officers from particular crimes that they commit with respect to shooting individuals and killing them. And it's the only context in which you'll see that. And that's why you saw people call for a special prosecutor when it comes to these police shootings, because prosecutors are ill-equipped to prosecute the police departments in which they work with, because the police department is actually the investigative arm of the police department.
Isn't there such thing as a private prosecution? I know it's not in every state, but there is private prosecutions, right? There's only like 2 states that have it.
It's not usually private prosecution. What it is there's special prosecutors in certain jurisdictions, and it's somebody that's not connected or attached to the local prosecutor's office. So when you hear people talk about that particular issue about special prosecutors, that's what they're asking for. They're asking for some level of independent review with respect to the way these police officers conduct themselves. And that's really the issue. The other aspect to all this is, and I mentioned it earlier, is holding your elected officials accountable. Because the reality is, especially in cities or whether they be county governments, your mayors and your city commissioners, they are the bosses of your chiefs of police. So if you have a community police department which isn't conducting itself in the way you want them to, your mayor has direct control over how that particular police chief engages the community. And if it's not being done the way you want it to, you can hold either your mayor accountable or your city commissioner accountable, or if you have a city manager, depending on where you are, you can hold that city manager accountable. So that's the administrative side of it. But with respect to the criminal side of it, unfortunately, what you're running into is what we call prosecutor discretion, and they're choosing not to pursue a lot of these crimes. They'll tell you that they're presenting these cases to a grand jury, but I'm here to tell you they're not presenting them the same way if they were trying to indict you and I. They go in full force trying to, if you committed a crime or I committed a crime, they go in 100% trying to indict you. And there's an old saying with regard to the legal field, the prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. If they really want to indict you, they can indict you. So that's the choice that they're making. So that's why we ask for diversity when it comes to prosecutors. We want prosecutors with a diverse background, because hopefully we'll get prosecutors with the courage to be able to bring charges against these particular officers. The only time we're seeing officers get indicted are really excessive cases where you see there's video evidence that somebody's being shot in cold blood. And unfortunately, even in those circumstances, you're not always seeing that either. So it leads you into a bigger argument as to whether or not this relationship is actually salvageable. I don't believe that the relationship between police and our community is salvageable. I think we should pursue other options, whether that be the elimination of police in our communities, and perhaps choose another option as far as policing ourselves. But that's another conversation for another day. But if you look at the research, you look at the academics, I mean, it's really not the police aren't designed to do what they're doing today. We ask them to do too much. We ask them to be mental health professionals. We ask them to be social workers. And when you interject implicit bias and prejudice and a number of things that activate themselves within the context of fear and a heightened sense of aggression, it's very hard to account for those things. And you're right, implicit bias training is not going to train that stuff away. You need to find another mechanism in order to address that.
Remember when I told you earlier, right, the police are the only persons that can legally kill you. Now I'm saying that with sincerity. It is amazing. The reason why you can't get a policeman charged is because the real issue is whether or not the homicide was justified or not. That's the real issue. That's number one. And number two, the way the laws are set up in Ohio based on culpable mental state. In other words, what was the mental capacity of that individual when he did what he did? And to show that a police officer got up that morning and was going to go and kill somebody is a most difficult thing to do. So a lot of these guys, and I don't know the relationship between them and the prosecutor, but I'm going to tell you this. At the end of the day, police, a person that you give a badge to and a gun, you better be sure that you give it to the right people. serious. Because they're out there, and many times they by themselves, and they can do almost anything in the world to you, and nobody knows but them. And even if they got somebody with them, then those individuals who are with them will side with the police that do something wrong. I'm telling you, I've been there 40 years in that stuff, and some of the stuff that goes on is unbelievable. And you would never even imagine some of the things that they can do and what they get away with. But at the end of the day, what is amazing to me is this. Any one of you in here, if you commit possibly a murder, and I got probable cause, I can take you and arrest you and lock you up and put you in jail. But if a police officer kills somebody, they don't go to jail right away. Am I right? They don't have any consequence. They don't have to go and be locked up based on what they've done. So the whole point is the whole criminal justice system has to be looked at. And one of the major problems is that the police have what they call articulable, reasonable things that they can say. Well, I thought I saw a gun. All the police officer has to say is, I thought I saw it, or I thought he had one. That's it. And if the person doesn't even have a gun, it doesn't matter. The police is in the perception of what he thinks at the time of the situation. And that's a hard bridge to go over and cross over. It's a hard one.
Sir, to your point about the school system where you say that the consequences, we're trying to be more lenient than you are, that we should have tougher consequences. I got an email from my doctor who was over in India on vacation, and she sent something back to me that I think you would appreciate from the standpoint of what you're saying, that our consequences should be tough. Over in this part of India, whatever crime you commit, 75% of any crime that's being committed is the death penalty. So they don't have a whole lot of murders and rapes and stealing and all that type of stuff because they know the consequences are so severe.
And of course, you know there's a difference between civil and Michael from pursuing it from a civil standpoint. And the theory is that activity and the financial consequences can produce systemic change. That's the theory. Even though that individual walked, it doesn't relieve the financial consequences which could come on the municipality.
The part about that is we actually, they have groups that will fund these people and pay these fines and do all this. So that's never going to do anything. White nationalist groups fund.
There's nobody walking up with $40 million if Robert and Michael hit him for that.
But not for us.
All right. I forgot to say two things while I was up here. We had three other people that want to speak. Four. I'm sorry. One is, one correction. Our office hours is Monday through Friday, 10 to 2. So we're not open on the weekends. So just in case you wrote down 7 days a week, it's Monday through Friday, 10 to 2. And then secondly, one thing we failed to do, and I like the fact that Ellis Jacobs did it, he brought us panel. But if you can go to your cell phone just for 1 quick second, your cell phones for just 1 quick second, your cell phones, and go to NAACPDayton.org, NAACPDayton.org. Go to your cell phones real quick. NAACPDayton.org. NAACPDayton.org. And then in the upper either left or right hand corner of your screen, you're going to see 3 lines up there. NAACPDayton.org. Hit those 3 lines so you can get all the different topics. And go down to the bottom and you're going to see NAACP resources. NAACP resources. And then once you do your NAACP resources, then you'll see our complaint form. But one thing that we should have brought here today, since we was on this topic, is we should have brought our 411, it's called 411 on the 50. So basically for how to deal with your interactions with law enforcement. So we have a pamphlet out there, educational tool to tell you how to interact with law enforcement in your home, on the streets, on the job. I think it's like 4 different ways. So the pamphlet is right there. So you go to NAACPDayton.org and click on the little 3 lines so you have a drop down menu. Go to the bottom to NAACP resources. Click on resources and look for that pamphlet called 411 on the 50. So you know how to deal with law enforcement. Have the NAACP say you should deal with law enforcement in your interactions with them. So thank you.
Hold on.
So are you next?
I tried to go up right at the beginning.
Oh, go ahead.
Please. Please.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. Thank you.
David is running. I'd like to really thank Mr. Gresham for some of the things he pointed out, because I find this a lot of times that people don't understand that the prosecutor is the one that makes a decision on what you're charged with. The police bring you in, they say that you did this, you did that, and that's up to the prosecutor. If you notice in Montgomery County, we never get a chance to vote and choose a prosecutor. We only get one choice. There's never opposition. And that is not a good thing. So somewhere we need oversight on the prosecutor to see how many of these things what they're choosing to prosecute and what they're choosing not to. Now, some of you might remember that there was somebody from the son of the coroner who was caught with a ton of pot. Did he spend any time in jail? No. There was a young lady who was living in the homeless shelter. She gave $2 to somebody across from the Ribble building. She spent 18 days in jail, lost her job, all these other things. So we have a problem in Montgomery County in that we don't have a choice in prosecutors, and we don't have anybody really running oversight on the prosecutor's office. But the second problem, and this is the one I really want to answer from this panel, is the rise of the private police department. Because you can go after the mayor about how the Dayton police charge you, or you can go and talk about how the sheriff, the county commissioner to the sheriff, and you can unelect the sheriff. But we have something like 28 police departments in the county that are run by municipalities, give or take. But we also have like 7 private police departments. Premier has one, Kettering Health has one, University of Dayton has one, Sinclair has one, Metro Parks has one. And guess what? We have no oversight on these people at all. And I'm sorry, you can't say I'm not going to pay a property tax and support a police department that's supposed to protect all of us. And then turn around and say, hey, I can afford to play my own police department and we get to play by our own rules. There was recently an incident with some police officers going in Miami Valley Hospital, assaulting people that were witnesses to a crime and arresting them. This is unconscionable, and I want to know why we're standing for it and why we're allowing it, because we have no control of those police departments.
So what's your question, David?
My question is what are we going to do to, 1, track the prosecutor and make sure he's prosecuting equally and fairly, and 2, why are we allowing private police departments who don't have to take you in, or they do if they choose to, or they call Dayton if they don't. But private police departments are a scary thing. Why do only rich people have private police departments in this county? That's a real concern. I don't have a private police officer, but Miami Valley Hospital does to protect their stuff. Why are only rich people allowed to protect their shit with private cops? Seriously.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. Anybody want to respond first? There is a relationship between so-called private police departments and government, and Robert, of course, the case your office handled in Cincinnati illustrates that. Do you have anything you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, with regard to the prosecutors, you're going to find somebody that has the courage to run against these prosecutors. But as far as the oversight, that's why it's important when it comes to your legislators that you push for the issues like special prosecutors. if we're going to function within the context that law enforcement is a necessary component of the way we're going to live in our society, if we're going to start with that base point, then yes, you have to find a way to oversight those particular agencies. With respect to the private police departments, the same legal standards apply to those. So from a civil perspective, we're still able to apply constitutional standards to those private police departments. But if it's a private police department, you can also speak with your financial authority as well. So it's an Ivy Valley, if it's Premier, and I think I know the case that he's talking about, that a police officer has assaulted somebody that was a witness to a particular crime. In those contexts, you can speak with actually patronizing those particular establishments. Now, it's difficult within the context of somebody like Ivy Valley Hospital, because we already know there's not a lot of healthcare options within the city, so you don't have a lot of places you can go to. But the reality is, you can hold those people accountable, especially if they're receiving federal funds. And that's how we typically try to do that with respect to those private actors, because if they receive any sort of federal funds, then the federal constitution applies to them, and there's different provisions that you can apply to them to hold them accountable. But the same standards constitutionally apply to those particular police departments. But back to the prosecutor issue, it really is a systemic issue, because you're up against a lot when it comes to trying to change the way grand juries are convened and the way they proceed. And a lot of that can only be changed through a constitutional amendment or with your legislators passing some sort of law that will address that. So a lot of that's going to happen with respect to lobbying. I know the NAACP does a lot of that lobbying, and you can pour your resources into your local NAACP or NAACP here in Dayton. And if that's an issue that the community decides that they want to push forward with, you can do that. And that's really the only way to approach that. Or, heaven forbid, you get somebody to run against Matt Heck and unseat him with respect to being a prosecutor. But unfortunately, he's got a lot of money behind him. He's running as a Democrat, but he's operating a little bit differently as a prosecutor. So the reality is there doesn't really need to be much oversight maybe with respect to the prosecutor, because I can tell you right now, they're not indicting any police officers. So you don't need to keep those stats, because the stat is 0%. So it speaks for itself, and we've seen a lot of these cases where it's very clear that these officers need to be held accountable, whether it's in Montgomery County or Greene County. Those officers need to be indicted, and they need to be held accountable criminally.
Yeah, the question of the prosecutor is a really interesting one, because as Robert alluded to, there has been a movement around the country to elect progressive prosecutors. We haven't seen that in Montgomery County yet, and most of the places where that's happened, I think it's happened because there's been some outrageous example of the prosecutor not doing his or her job. And so that people start taking notice of that office and realizing that it could be done better, and that people emerge from the community and are willing to put themselves out there and run against the incumbent prosecutor, which is not an easy thing to do. But just to give you some idea of the day-to-day impact of having a prosecutor pursuing one set of policies or another set of policies. When our jail was last rebuilt back in I think it was 93, right? They added a whole wing to the jail, and they determined that the correct size for that jail was 443 beds, because that fit our crime rate back then. So we're likely to need 443 beds, which was determined back in 1993. Well, today, the crime rate is a little more than half the crime rate in 1993. If you look at the FBI statistics, yet we have twice that number of people jammed into that jail. 800 people typically in a jail built for 443 people. The prosecutor has a lot to do with why we have that situation.
And the reason why a prosecutor matters, if you just look at an example, Marilyn Mosby out with the Freddie Gray case, she caught a lot of heat for going after those officers, but that's what happens when you have a prosecutor who is invested in the community and understands what the community needs and has a different perspective. So, those are the type of prosecutors you need to put in those offices, people that have the courage to actually go after these officers.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
This is more of a civil question.
That's what we were hoping for. Go ahead.
Have there ever been a case like the digital divide where it took multiple cities and counties came together to sue a major company through Able. Have you ever had another large case like that?
I think I know what you're talking about. Many years ago, we represented Edgemont, and we got involved in telecommunications regulation cases. This was when the internet was first, we called it the information super highway, in fact, if I remember correctly. And we did represent Edgemont and was able to get, we were able to get a fair amount of money out of AT&T in order to create community computer centers so that everybody could get involved in this new thing called the internet. Have we done other cases like that? Let me think about it. We continue to do those sorts of things, but that was a particularly interesting one.
I was thinking, do people come together in Western Ohio to sue a major person that think that their civil rights or their social justice, do you do any major social justice cases where more than just one group is coming together to sue a particular party?
I'm going to say yes. As long as you don't require me to give the names, dates, and all such cases.
And to answer that question, they don't do class actions when it comes to like torts. It's very difficult to do. When we say torts, we're talking about individual actions against individuals rather than like products liability cases. Those tort cases aren't really conducive to a class action because everybody's case is so individual and so different. But one area in which you are starting to see mass tort is when it comes to the sexual harassment or sexual assault cases. Michigan State, you're seeing a lot of stuff pop up now with Ohio State with the wrestlers and the athletes who were sexually assaulted by the doctor out there. We're in the process of doing some investigation there as well. Penn State was a similar situation. Like I said, Michigan State with those gymnasts as well. Those aren't class actions, but those are what we call mass tort actions, and those are social justice actions where people have band together and utilized the strength of their numbers to attempt to secure some sort of legal redress that maybe they couldn't do on their own.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Ellis. Sir.
Good evening. My name is Gerald Bennett. I'm a Daytonian. Went to school here in Dayton. I'm proud of the Gem City. And I'm hoping I'm asking a good question. And it's actually toward Pastor Cranford. When you first told us about yourself, you had mentioned something about vocational training. And my question is, when I was in school, they had vocational training in all of the high schools. Wood shop, machine shop, cosmetology, they had all of those things. Everybody is not college material. And I wonder is there a plan or even something on the table that all the schools may start giving vocational training again?
Sir, if you don't mind, our education chair is not here, but that person would have more information on that. But I'll tell you what we can do. We can get you the answer to what you're asking for. I don't happen to have that knowledge on whether or not they're pushing for that. I graduated from Patterson Co-op High School, and then we had a vocation down there, and it did a lot of us real good with the vocations, and especially for those who were maybe in some areas where their parents probably didn't think they were going to graduate, but they had these vocational schools that they could go to where they could learn a trade and get from right out of school and get a good job. So I am a proponent of vocational schools, but we can get you that information if, of course, Attorney Leppla doesn't have any more information to share with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Hi, Felicia Hill, Dayton, Ohio. Felicia Hill, Dayton, Ohio. I have two questions. One is about, are you familiar with restorative justice, and what is your insight on that? If you could say that, because with the one gentleman, we're talking about the consequences Because we have jailed people for years and years and years and come out with the same results. So to kind of elaborate from your perspective about restorative justice. And the other thing, mediation. With mediation, how cost effective is it and how effective is it overall? So that was two-part questions. Restorative justice, your insight on that. And what do you think about the restorative justice concept? And mediation, instead of just going to a lawyer or having lawyers to come together. So I'll sit down and listen to my question. Thank you.
I'll answer the second part of that question. That is, we have a very strong mediation program in our courts of the civil cases in Montgomery County. And in fact, Montgomery County was one of the leaders statewide 25 years ago with that program, with special funding from the Ohio Supreme Court. We talked about delays, and Robert explained how you can only do so much as a lawyer to move a case. That's why mediation is popular. Judges, and I'm sure Judge Wheelwortham Spells back there would agree, love mediation and love resolution by mediation. They used to ask us, or used to say, good job, you mediated and you settled the case. Now the question is, why didn't you mediate and settle the case? So there's great impetus, and that helps unclog the courts, and it helps move cases forward. So it's a positive thing. And it's not just in the legal context, it's not just in the civil case context, it's in various contexts. And let me pass this down.
I used to be a mediator for the city of Dayton, and it works. Matter of fact, when I came out of the state of Ohio, we trained Ohio. We gave them the mediation training. The city of Dayton did that. So that's how they came in terms of EEOC and EEO and Ohio Civil Rights Training. All that came through mediation. It works. It's a great program. But I think the bigger issue for me is when I have people coming into the office, there are so many alternatives to dealing with the problem. And many times they're not doing that. They put people in jail that shouldn't be in there. There should be some kind of diversions program to keep them from going in there. And it's just amazing how these things are not happening. But mediation works. It's an excellent program.
Yeah, so with respect to the restorative justice component, I'm a big advocate for restorative justice, and that's kind of one of the components when I talk about eliminating law enforcement in communities of color. You have to then look at alternatives. So what are we going to do if we don't have police in our communities? Well, one of the things that you will hear, and I'm sure it sounds like you know a little bit about it, restorative justice is a concept that basically says rather than just simply punish individuals, we're going to try to find a way to integrate those individuals back into our communities. You see it oftentimes in a lot of inner city schools now where they're starting to look at restorative justice options rather than punish individuals. I'm talking about consequences, but rather than simply suspending those individuals, because what we know is when you suspend students, it disproportionately affects students of color. Rather than do that, we find a way to create a healing situation where we address the actual underlying concern as to why this particular circumstance happened. Because it operates from the perspective that we're not inherently criminal, we're not inherently violent. So rather than tapping into that violence and saying we're just going to punish you and send you to jail, which the sociology tells us that just makes the individual worse. Nobody's ever gotten better simply by going to jail. And the problem is our criminal justice system is focused on penalizing and punishing people rather than rehabilitating people. Restorative justice has a focus on the individual and says, you're an individual that's an asset to your community, how can we reintegrate you back in the community? And that's even more important when you talk about communities of color, because we know that our criminal justice system disproportionately impacts our community. So the faces that you see in our jails are disproportionately black and brown. So if you have more of those folks in jail, you're taking functional people out of our communities that could be earning a living, supporting their families, and you're tearing apart our families. The idea behind restorative justice is, let's not punish people, let's find a way to rehabilitate these folks because we know they're not inherently wrong. And the reality is, many of the issues that you see criminally aren't a result of somebody just wanting to commit a crime. They're about trying to close the gap between providing for their family and simply surviving. And a lot of these crimes are nonviolent. So if we operate from that perspective, we understand that by and large, most people aren't inherently dangerous. communities, most people aren't inherently criminal, then what we can do is we can start to rehabilitate those individuals rather than simply punishing those people. And that's why it matters with respect to, in my opinion, moving away from a model that says we have to be policed. And we have to fight that concept within our own community, because somewhere along the line, we accepted the premise that we needed some level of oversight. Now, there's some historical conversation there, but what I would charge you is we don't need oversight in our communities. We can address crime within our own communities. We can close those gaps by creating after-school programs, getting proper mental health care professionals. We can do a number of things that will close those gaps that will eliminate those criminal issues. So we need to start looking at alternatives rather than just saying, let's throw more police at the issue, because it's not working. Can't be.
Thank you. Excellent. Sir, you want to ask our last question?
My name is Alonzo Edwards. I have two questions as well. I'm trying to make it quick. First one is getting back on the subject of consequences. We all know we went through 2018 together, where we had many Caucasians calling the police on black people doing regular things, barbecuing, stuff like that. But us in Dayton know we had the worst situation of somebody calling the police on somebody that wasn't really doing anything criminal with the John Crawford case. So the first question I have is, I'm not going to speak out of place, but I don't know how much has been pursued, but how much and how close are they to like bringing some charges against the Richie, I believe his name is, that made that call that ended up in John Crawford being killed. So that's my first question. And then my second question is, I'm a criminal justice graduate myself, like I think the capacity was. I graduated from Gary Jacobs like 3 years ago, right before they closed it here in the city. But my second question to that is, I don't have, my problem is, I can't really get a job in my field right now because I have a bad work, just being all honest, I have a bad work record, employment history, bad employment history. I have some misdemeanor charges that some people in this field are just not going to hire me with. And I'm homeless, living in the shelter. So the second question would be, what advice would any of you give me that maybe help me out?
Thank you. Robert, you want to take the first one?
I can actually answer both real quick. The second question, there's options for you. So they just changed the expungement law, and you might know a little bit more about this than I would, but they changed the expungement law to say that if you have increased the number of misdemeanors, which you can get expunged off your record. There's also another option that doesn't remove those misdemeanors or felonies. It's called a CQE, which is a Certificate of Qualified Employment. You can apply for one of these, and the idea is it's basically a certificate from the court that says this person is employable despite having these things on their record. And you can apply on that particular CQE, either in the county court or the municipal court, or you can go to there's different lawyers that do different workshops throughout the city from time to time. So it's called a CQE, Certificate of Qualified Employment. And then you also have the expungement law, which you can obviously talk to ABLE, Legal Aid. You can talk to them and they'll be able to tell you what's going on there. I can speak to the Ronald Ritchie issue. You're talking about Ronald Ritchie was the 911 caller that eventually he called the police. He was the reason why the police responded to Walmart. Well, he wasn't held accountable. He wasn't charged with any crime, and that's an issue. But I don't want to conflate the issue, because the reality is, while Ronald Ritchie was wrong and what he told the police was entirely inaccurate and not true, the reality is the responsibility was still on the police, that they still had to assess the situation when they came to that Walmart. And the reality is, whether a 911 caller is telling the truth or not telling the truth, that's why we have an assessment component by our police officers, because 911 calls are inherently unreliable. So regardless of what Ronald Ritchie did, and he's definitely culpable, the reality is that the police department is the reason why John Crawford is dead. Now, there's also a component with respect to Walmart having an air rifle out of its packaging at that particular Walmart. And basically what you have is you have a Walmart customer who was shot for carrying around a Walmart product. So that's really what the case boils down. That's what the case boils down to in a state that's an open carry state, by the way. So you're actually allowed to carry around a weapon, but unfortunately, the way that acts in practice is you can carry around a weapon if you're anybody but somebody of person of color, and you can walk around with a weapon as much as you want. But if you're black and in this city and in this state, then you're not able to carry around a weapon. So there's a lot of components to it, but But don't get caught up in the issue of Ronald Ritchie too much, because the responsibility is still the Beaver Creek Police Department and this particular officer who is responsible for the only other fatal killing in Beaver Creek history. So pay attention to the newspaper articles that you read, because this guy had a history, and he was a killing waiting to happen. And Beaver Creek Police Department knew that, and while Ronald Ritchie is culpable, the responsibilities of the police department to be able to assess that situation, and the responsibilities of Walmart to not have an air rifle that looks like a real gun out of its packaging and not secure.
Thank you. Of course, public policy is you want people to report everything they think they see. And it's hard to turn that boat when you're encouraging people to report anything they see that they think is suspicious. And it comes back to the police officers discerning what the situation is when they arrive.
Hey, Chairman, just if you could elaborate, you did the misdemeanor, but can you do the felony part of it as well? The expungement part, so everyone knows as well.
I'm afraid I don't know about the expungement.
Well, the expungement part of it is you can do the misdemeanors, but now state law that was changed is you can expunge up to 5 felonies as well in that law that was established as well.
Well, thanks for talking about that. I can tell you that they did change the law that allows people who have large fines and fees related to license suspensions, their licenses are suspended. You can now go through a process that allows you to have those fines cut way back and get your license back. And that's a really important thing. We had a clinic on that a couple of weeks ago. We were expecting 100 people to show up. We had it up at the new library up where Fairview High School used to be. 350 people showed up, so there was a big demand for this. We weren't ready for 350 people.
Right.
We're going to have more of such clinics, and if you know of people that are up against that where they can't drive because their license is suspended and they're not going to get it back until they pay some outrageous amount of money, that's what this new law is for.
But at the same time, with that, they're not able, if they owe a court money, then still they have to pay that court before the B&B will still grant them a license or something like that.
That's what they're trying to reform right now.
Okay, perfect.
Absolutely.
And as far as where to go, I would recommend that you contact your local public defender's office with respect to the expungements and the CQEs, because they're on the front lines. Our public defender department in Montgomery County is one of the best public defender's offices in the country. They're excellent attorneys, and that's an excellent place to start, because they'll be able to start that process and basically walk individuals through the CQE and the expungement process. They're experts in that particular field, and that's where you want to start. And they have clinics all the time throughout the county, candidly, and they'll come to you for the most part. You'll see them in Huber Heights, you'll see them in Vandalia, but that's where I would start if you're somebody that thinks that that might be an option for you.
And this whole process of accumulating fines and incarcerating people even for plastic crimes, as they're called, related to driving privileges, where you keep digging into a hole, don't get out, is being addressed, hopefully by the legislature, but our state public defender, who comes from this community, has been a major leader in that effort, and we really think change is at hand. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you, panelists. We appreciate your work and thank you all.
Let us give Chairman Leppla a hand for pulling together this esteemed panel. Well informed, and thank you to the videographer for filming, because he will post it. So give it up for the So thank you. Next month in the same room, the 4th Monday of next month, the message will be centered around our youth and college division. So if you have youth and college age students, bring them to the meeting next month to get engaged with our youth and college division. Thank you very much. Have a good night.